The photo on my mantel shows a woman I barely recognize anymore. She's smiling, genuinely smiling, standing in front of a pale yellow house with white shutters, her arm around a man who looks at her like she hung the moon. That was taken in 1987, the summer my husband and I finished paying off our first mortgage on the house in Decatur. We were so proud that day. Mitch opened a bottle of champagne right there in the driveway, and the neighbors thought we'd lost our minds. Mitch passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which the doctor said was mercifully fast, and I have spent every day since then disagreeing with that assessment. There is nothing merciful about watching the person you built your entire adult life with disappear in less than 3 months. After he was gone, I stayed in that house. Our house, the one we bought together in 1987 and paid off and repainted twice and replanted the garden in after the drought of 2012. Every room had a memory attached to it. The kitchen smelled like his coffee even months after he was gone, or maybe I just wanted it to. I kept his robe on the hook behind the bathroom door until my daughter started saying it wasn't healthy. My daughter. That's where I have to start, I suppose, because she's the center of everything that happened. Her name is Melissa, and she's 41 years old, and for the first 38 of those years I would have told you she was my greatest accomplishment. Smart, driven, quick to laugh. She called me every Sunday without fail. She remembered my friends' names and asked after them. When Mitch was sick, she drove down from Cincinnati every other weekend without being asked. Her husband's name is Russell. They met at a conference, married after 2 years of dating, and I genuinely thought that he was a good man. Steady, practical. He coached Little League for their son Tyler, and he always stood up when I walked into a room, which Mitch said was a good sign in a man. I should have looked closer. About 18 months after Mitch passed, Melissa started calling more. Not just Sundays, Tuesdays, sometimes Thursdays. Little check-in calls that felt warm at first, and then started to feel, if I'm being honest, like assessments. How are you sleeping, Mom? Are you eating enough? Have you talked to anyone about the grief? I told her I was fine. I was fine mostly. Lonely? Yes. The house felt enormous with just me in it. But I had my routine, morning walks with my neighbor Patty, book club on Wednesdays, my garden, my shows. I was managing. Then one Sunday in October, Melissa asked if I'd ever thought about coming to live with them. We have the space, she said. Tyler would love having you close. And Russell and I have been talking. We just feel better knowing you're not alone down there. I said I'd think about it. And I did think about it. For 3 weeks, I thought about almost nothing else. The house in Decatur was mine. Outright. No mortgage, no liens, my name alone on the deed since Mitch and I had updated the paperwork after he got sick. It was worth somewhere around $340,000 at that point, but it was also 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and a yard I was increasingly struggling to keep up with on my own. And Melissa was right that Tyler would love it. He was 6 then, and wild about me in the way that only young grandchildren can be, completely, unconditionally, without any of the complicated feelings that come later. I said yes. I want to be very clear about what I understood the arrangement to be, because later there would be a lot of confusion, manufactured confusion I now believe about the details. I was moving into my daughter's home in Cincinnati. I would contribute to household expenses in a reasonable way. My house in Decatur would stay in my name. I told Melissa explicitly I'm not selling it yet. I want to wait and see how this feels. She said that was completely fine. Of course it was fine. It was my house. I moved in the first week of November. Melissa had set up the guest room beautifully. New bedding, my favorite flowers in a vase on the dresser. Tyler ran down the driveway when the moving truck pulled up and threw himself at me so hard I nearly fell over. Russell carried in boxes and said all the right things. For about 2 months it was lovely. I'm not sure exactly when things shifted. That's the part that still bothers me. I can't point to a single moment and say, there, that's when it changed. It was more like a slow dimming. The way a room gets darker in the late afternoon and you don't notice until suddenly you can't see clearly anymore. Russell started working from home full-time in January. He had a home office at the end of the hall, and he was particular about noise during the day. I learned to time my phone calls for when he was on lunch. I learned not to run the vacuum before noon. Small accommodations. Nothing worth making a fuss about. Melissa got a promotion that winter, a significant one, with longer hours and more travel. She was wonderful about it, calling me from airports and hotel rooms, apologetic, grateful. I told her not to worry. I was happy to be there for Tyler. That was the whole point, wasn't it? Tyler and I had a good routine. I walked him to school in the mornings. I picked him up on Tuesdays and Thursdays when Melissa was in the office late. We made cookies on Saturdays and watched nature documentaries together, and he told me everything about his friends, his teacher, a girl in his class named Becca, who he was pretty sure was the nicest person alive. I loved those afternoons with him. They were the best part of my days. The worst part of my days increasingly was Russell. It was never loud, never explosive. He wasn't that kind of man, I came to understand. He was the quiet kind, which is in some ways worse. A comment here, a sigh there. The way he looked at the food I'd cooked, as if he was deciding whether it met some standard I hadn't been told about. The way he talked about my house in Decatur in casual conversation. That property, as if it were a business asset rather than the home where I raised my children. In March, he sat down with me after dinner one evening and presented what he called a contribution agreement. He had actually printed it out, 4 pages with headers. The gist of it was that I should be paying $1,500 a month in household expenses, my fair share, he said, of utilities, groceries, and maintenance. He'd calculated it based on square footage and occupancy ratios. He used the phrase occupancy ratios while I sat across from him at the dinner table where I had eaten breakfast with my grandson every morning for 4 months. I looked at the paper for a long time. Then I looked at my daughter. Melissa was studying the table. We talked about contributing to expenses, Russell said. Not unkindly, exactly. More like a man closing a negotiation. This just formalizes it. I said I needed to think about it. He said he understood. He left the papers on the table. I went to my room and called Patty in Decatur and cried for 45 minutes. I did not sign the agreement. I started paying $600 a month in cash, put it in an envelope, left it on the kitchen counter the first of every month. It felt humiliating, paying to live in my daughter's house, but I told myself it was reasonable. I was eating their food. I was using their utilities. $600 was fair. Russell never acknowledged the envelopes. He just stopped bringing up the agreement. Summer came and went. I noticed that Melissa and Russell had begun a significant renovation in the backyard. New deck, landscaping, a storage shed. I assumed they'd saved for it. I didn't ask. I noticed Tyler stopped running to find me when he came home from school. I told myself he was just getting older. In September, I drove back to Decatur for a long weekend to check on the house and visit Patty. The lawn care company I'd hired was doing a decent job. The neighbor said it was strange, seeing the house dark at night. I walked through every room and sat in Mitch's chair in the study for a long time. When I got back to Cincinnati, something had shifted in the house, a coolness I couldn't name. The real turning point was Christmas Eve. I had been looking forward to it for months. Melissa's brother, my son Owen, was coming down from Columbus with his wife and their 2 girls. The house would be full. I'd been baking for 2 weeks. I made my mother's pecan pie and the shortbread that Tyler had requested specifically, and a layered salad that Melissa had loved since she was a child. We sat down to dinner at 7. The table looked beautiful. Owen was in good spirits. The girls were fizzing with excitement about the next morning. Tyler sat next to me and told me quietly that Santa was definitely coming because he'd been mostly good all year, which made me laugh so hard I had to put down my fork. Russell waited until dessert. He waited until I had just stood up to bring in the pie, actually. I remember that clearly. I was halfway out of my chair when his voice stopped me. "While everyone's here," he said, "I think we should talk about some practical family matters." I sat back down. He looked across the table at me with the same expression he'd used presenting the contribution agreement back in March. Measured. Prepared. Patricia. "That's me. I go by Pat. Has been living with us for over a year now. We love having her, and we want that to continue." A pause. "But I think it's time to acknowledge that the current arrangement isn't sustainable. The house costs are significant. We've been absorbing a lot." Owen frowned. "What do you mean absorbing?" "Pat's contribution to household expenses hasn't kept pace with actual costs." Russell slid a piece of paper across the table. I recognized the format, same headers as the agreement from March, updated figures. "Going forward, we're proposing $2,000 a month. It's fair market rate for a private room and full household access in this neighborhood." The table went silent. Tyler looked at me with those big eyes and said, "Grammy, are you moving away?" I could not speak for a moment. I was looking at my daughter, who was looking at the tablecloth again, and I was trying to understand what was happening, and I was also trying not to cry in front of my grandchildren on Christmas Eve. Owen said, "Russell, this really isn't the time." "It's fine," I heard myself say. My voice was steady. "I don't know how. I'll look at the numbers." I brought in the pecan pie. I served everyone. I smiled at the right moments. After Owen's daughters went to sleep, I excused myself and went to my room. I did not sleep at all that night. What happened over the next 72 hours changed everything. The next morning, Christmas morning, I was up at 5:30. The house was quiet. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and tried to think clearly about what my options were. I had approximately $47,000 in savings, retirement distributions, and money I'd put aside carefully over the years. I was 68 years old. I was living in my daughter's house, paying for the privilege, having just been publicly asked to pay more in front of my family on the holiest night of the year. I decided I needed to understand exactly where I stood legally. This was not something I had thought about before. I'd been trusting Melissa completely. She was my daughter, but the conversation at dinner had felt less like a family discussion and more like something else, a presentation, a pressure campaign, and I needed to know what my rights were before I responded. I went to my room and opened my laptop and started searching. Real estate law, Ohio. Rights of house guests. What rights does a parent have living with adult children? That search led me, eventually, to looking at my own property documents. I had brought copies of everything from Decatur, deed, insurance policy, tax records, organized in a folder in my closet. Just good practice. Mitch had always said to keep your important papers close. I pulled out the folder and spread everything on the bed. The deed looked right. My name, the property address, the county seal, the insurance policy looked right too. Until I checked the named insured line, it listed two names, mine and Russell's. I sat there for a long time looking at that piece of paper, and then I looked at it some more, and then I went through the rest of the folder very carefully. The most recent tax statement, the one from that October, showed the property address, but the mailing address for tax notices had been changed. Changed to Russell and Melissa's Cincinnati address. I hadn't received the tax statement because it hadn't been sent to me. There was a document I didn't immediately recognize. It took me several minutes reading it twice to understand what I was looking at. It was a home equity line of credit agreement on my property in Decatur, in the amount of $85,000. My signature was on the last page. I did not sign that document. I know my own signature. I've had the same signature since I was 17 years old, and a teacher made me practice penmanship until I got it right. I know every loop and slant of it. The signature on that page was close, practiced, careful, but it wasn't mine. The date was from 8 months earlier, a Thursday in April when I had been in Cincinnati, because I never went back to Decatur on weekdays. I closed the folder and sat completely still for probably 10 minutes. Then I picked up my phone and called Owen. He answered on the second ring, even though it was not yet 7 in the morning on Christmas Day. When I told him what I'd found, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Mom, don't touch anything. Don't say anything to them. I'll be there in 2 hours." He was there in 90 minutes. We sat in my room with the door closed and went through everything together. Owen had worked in commercial real estate for 20 years. He knew these documents. He confirmed what I already knew. The HELOC was real. Someone had drawn down $62,000 of it. The insurance change was real. The forged signature was, in his words, unmistakably not yours. "This is fraud, Mom," he said quietly. "This is wire fraud and forgery and potentially identity theft." I asked him if he was sure. He said yes. I asked him what we should do. He said we needed a lawyer, and we needed one before I said a single word to Melissa or Russell. We left the house that morning under the pretense of Owen taking me to church. Russell was still asleep. Melissa was in the kitchen, and she looked at me strangely as we put on our coats, but I smiled at her and said I'd be back for Tyler's gifts. Owen had found a name, a real estate attorney in Columbus who owed him a favor. She answered her phone on Christmas Day, which told me something about Owen's relationship with her, and also about the seriousness of what we were dealing with. She told us not to confront, not to move, not to remove any documents from the house, and to call her back Monday morning. We went back. I watched Tyler open his presents. I ate Christmas lunch and smiled and helped clear the dishes and gave no indication whatsoever of what I had found. That performance was the hardest thing I've done since sitting at Mitch's bedside. Monday morning I was in Columbus by 9. Owen came with me. The attorney, her name was Patricia too, which felt like a strange small comfort, had already done preliminary research over the weekend. The HELOC was legitimate in the bank's eyes because the paperwork appeared correct. The forgery would require a handwriting expert to confirm. The insurance change was the simplest thread to pull. It had been initiated by Russell 8 months ago, before the HELOC was drawn. She laid it out carefully. We had a strong case. Forgery was a felony in Ohio. The HELOC fraud could involve federal wire fraud charges. The insurance change was evidence of premeditation. She also told me something I needed to hear. This is your property, free and clear, and no one can take it from you without your consent. What they've done creates liability for them, not for you. I cried in her office. Not sad crying, the other kind. We filed a police report that week. The detective who handled it was a woman about Melissa's age, and she was thorough and kind, and did not once treat me like a confused old woman who had misunderstood something. She treated me like a crime victim, which is what I was. Melissa called me that Wednesday, the ordinary Sunday called early kind of call. I answered. I talked about Tyler and the weather and said I was staying with Owen for a few days to sort through some things. She didn't ask what things. Looking back, I think she already knew something was wrong. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life, including the months after Mitch died. At least grief is clean. What I went through in those months was complicated and ugly and full of silences where there used to be words. When Russell was served, Melissa called me 9 times in one day. I didn't answer. My attorney advised against contact while the case was active. Owen stayed close. Patty drove up from Decatur and spent a week with me at Owen's house. My book club sent a card, which sounds small but made me cry at the kitchen table. Melissa called Owen instead, looking for me. He told her he loved her and that she needed to talk to a lawyer and that he hoped she understood the seriousness of what had happened. She did eventually, I think. The gravity of it settled on her in stages, the way it does. There was a morning, I only heard about this later, from Owen, when she called him very early, before 6, and just cried for a long time without saying anything comprehensible. He sat on the phone with her until she could talk. She said she hadn't known about the insurance change. She said she thought the HELOC was something I'd agreed to over the phone. She said Russell had told her I'd been consulted about everything. I don't know what the truth is about what she knew. I may never know exactly. What I know is that my signature was forged without my consent, and that my home equity was used to fund a deck and landscaping and whatever else they'd spent $62,000 on, and that I was never told. Russell was charged. He negotiated a plea agreement, the details of which I was informed of but had no control over, which is a strange feeling. He would not go to prison, which my attorney had told me was unlikely given his lack of prior record. He would repay the full $62,000 drawn from the HELOC. The account would be closed, and my insurance policy would be restored to my name alone. My name alone, the way it had always been. I moved back to Decatur in April. Patty helped me open the house back up, aired out the rooms, refreshed the garden beds, got the mail pile sorted. The first morning I walked into the kitchen and made coffee in my own coffee maker in my own kitchen in the house where Mitch and I had lived for 31 years. I stood at the window for a long time just looking at the backyard. The maple tree we'd planted for our 20th anniversary had gotten enormous while I was gone. Melissa and I have spoken since then. Carefully, distantly, the way you speak to someone you love but aren't sure you know anymore. Tyler called me on my birthday in July and told me about Becca from his class, who was apparently still the nicest person alive. That phone call kept me going for weeks. I don't know what Melissa and Russell's marriage looks like now. That's not my business. What I know is that I have my house, and my name is the only one on any document related to it. And I had the locks changed when I moved back, and I sleep through the night. I wanted to say one more thing, because I've turned this over in my mind since everything happened, and I think it's the most honest thing I can offer. I was not naive. I was trusting. There's a difference. I trusted my daughter because she had given me 38 years of reasons to trust her. The fact that that trust was violated is not proof that trusting was stupid. It's proof that betrayal can come from anywhere, including the people who have your whole history in their hands. What I wish I had done differently is this. I wish I had worked with an attorney before I moved, to put in writing what the arrangement was and what it wasn't. Not because I suspected anything, I didn't, not for a long time, but because clear agreements protect everyone. They protect the relationship. They remove the ambiguity that bad actors can exploit. I also wish I had kept better track of my own documents, not because it was my fault that they were tampered with, it wasn't, but because I would have caught it sooner. Patty tells me I'm too hard on myself. She's probably right. She usually is. This is my house. I bought it at 44 years old with the man I loved, and I paid it off. And I raised my children here, and I will live here for as long as I'm able. No one's name is on it but mine. Some mornings I still take the photo off the mantel, the one in front of the pale yellow house, and I look at that woman smiling in the summer sun with her husband beside her, and I think she had no idea what was coming. She had no idea about the cancer or the grief or the long quiet year in Cincinnati or the Christmas Eve that upended everything. But she also had no idea how much she was capable of. Neither did I, honestly, until I had to find out. People ask me sometimes, friends, neighbors, even Patty, who knows me better than almost anyone, whether I'm bitter about what happened, whether I hate Russell, whether I've forgiven Melissa. I don't have a clean answer to any of those questions. What I have is this. I understand now that the way things unfolded was not random. Russell didn't wake up one morning and decide to forge my signature out of nowhere. It happened in stages, over months, and at every stage there were small choices, his, Melissa's, and honestly mine too, that made the next step possible. He took the insurance change because nothing stopped him. He drew on the HELOC because the first smaller moves had gone unnoticed. Deception doesn't usually arrive all at once. It walks in slowly, wearing ordinary clothes, and counts on you not looking too closely. That's the part I had to sit with. I wasn't stupid. But I stopped paying attention to my own affairs because I was too busy trying to be accommodating, too worried about seeming difficult, too invested in the story I wanted to be true. That my daughter had invited me into her home out of love, full stop. The moment I stopped tending to my own ground, someone else started working it. I think about the morning I found those documents. It was Christmas, and it was barely light outside, and I was sitting at a kitchen table that wasn't mine, drinking coffee I'd made with someone else's machine, feeling more alone than I had since the week after Mitch died. And then I opened that folder, and something shifted in me that I don't have a precise word for. It wasn't rage, though there was some of that. It was more like clarity. Like a fog I hadn't even known was there suddenly lifting. What I know now, that I didn't know then, is that intelligence isn't just about being smart in the conventional sense. It's about staying awake to your own life, knowing where your documents are, understanding what your name on a piece of paper actually means, not outsourcing your security to someone else's goodwill, no matter how much you love them. I had a good mind and decades of life experience, and I still let the administrative details of my own existence drift because I assumed someone else was looking after them. That assumption cost me $62,000 and the year of my life and something in my relationship with my daughter that I'm not sure either of us knows how to fully repair. But here is the other side of it. The part that took me longer to see. I did find out. I did act. At 68 years old, the week after Christmas, I sat across from an attorney and understood every word she said and made clear-eyed decisions about what to do next. That took something. I'm not going to be falsely modest about it. It took the kind of steadiness that you don't know you have until the moment demands it from you, and then either you find it or you don't. I found it. I'm glad I did. The house indicator is mine. The maple tree is enormous. Some mornings that's enough.